This latest chapter of One Punch Man, titled Sinking Feeling, begins with a shot of Garo and Saitama staring one another down as from above, by way of the ever-massive moon, is an iris and pupil, one littered by a multitude of stars, planets, and galaxies, what we should all be able to recognize to be the all-seeing eye of God, despite the entity known as God in this story possessing no visible features on its face. The true extent of God's purview is largely still in question, but based on what we have seen from it thus far, it most certainly does appear to be quite the opportunist. Despite being dubbed God, it perhaps more so favors the vices of a devil, preying upon the weak and downtrodden with deals largely skewed in its own favor. If we're being completely honest, Garo has no hope of defeating Saitama. This man is the one undeniable figure that stands to dismantle all of his dreams and aspirations. And in such desperation for victory, it's not hard to imagine that he might just be enticed to strike a bargain with the creature. However, we would go back to just before Saitama pulled up on him, as Garo would think of all the S-class heroes that have been laid out by the events prior, which would prompt him to look down on all of them, believing that even in such a situation, they have yet to show their faces, and so it must mean that they are all staying down. Yet unbeknownst to Garo, just before, several of the heroes did actually manage to regain consciousness and have since been swallowed by the S-class hero, Pig God, and taken to some semblance of safety. And so now, believing himself to be the last man standing with no one left to oppose him, Garo's resolve to become an absolute evil would intensify. After all, to follow his defeat of Sage Centipede, his fist was perfected, achieving the pinnacle of martial arts prowess, ever so boldly believing that there was nothing left for him to fear. He considered himself to be peerless in strength, and I can't blame him. Not only has he seemingly won this King of the Hill series of battles, but he's also gone against several of the Hero Association's best fighters, so yeah, from his perspective, he was on the top of the world. However, that was not the whole truth, as we all know, and perhaps on account of his incredible instincts, a part of Garo knew it too, as although he should be beyond fear at this point, he could not help but be bothered by something unknown. A sort of sinking feeling that he was missing something major, some sort of oversight that absolutely needed to be addressed for the sake of his ambitions. Yet he could not figure out what the cause was for the life of him. However, in his consideration of all this, Garo would recall the existence of evil ocean water, the creature that had blasted him with a torrent of water during his confrontation with Sage Centipede. And despite the fight at one point being like a sort of handicap match, past that, the watery monstrosity was not a factor at all, to the point of even being forgotten until now. But of course, we know that the monster had been killed with ease by Saitama, and I want you to keep that in mind, the fact that Garo's focus was tunnel visioned and he did not notice much of anything else, because it is important for what comes later. But before that time comes, be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications on. Now, as Garo thought to himself, Saitama would drop down into the water behind him, as we would finally have these two incredibly overpowered combatants be face to face. Saitama would firstly ask what Garo was supposed to be, as Garo would respond with a question of his own, asking who the hell Saitama was. That being said, he would mull over Saitama's question for a bit, all the while thinking to himself that the man must be a no-name hero sent for the sake of rescue operations. Garo would continue to look at the blank expression of Saitama and give some thought to the words of his former master Bang, who told him to follow the voice of his heart. From which point, Garo would internally apologize to him, deciding to instead do something that only he could do, then proclaiming himself to be Garo the monster before Saitama. Which is to say that in his heart of hearts, Garo does not actually want to be this absolute evil he keeps on talking about. However, it at this point may feel like an obligation, in that sense making him a sort of hero despite the questionable ways he goes about it. And for some reason or another, Garo felt the need to provide an entire speech along with his declaration, proclaiming that he is the one who will plunge all of mankind into the depths of despair, becoming absolute evil incarnate. He planned to make the entire world know the pain of bullying, which the heroes had always ignored, a sort of vengeful protection in a way. But Saitama was confused by this notion of absolute evil, at least in regards to Garo, who honestly did not strike him as evil at all, especially considering the fact that Garo only just recently saved a helicopter from the massive centipede monster, which he then split into two with a karate chop. And these observations took Garo off guard, as he had no idea he was being observed. And I need you guys to think about that. Saitama was in the middle of the ocean, surfing by way of a military aircraft carrier, and all the while was able to notice and observe each of Garo's various acts. Meanwhile, Garo still does not know what happened to evil ocean water. This goes beyond just a simple power divide. This comes down to their perceptive capabilities as well. The supposed monster would chuckle to himself. He'd respond to Saitama's questions by stating that absolute evil requires absolute strength, and for the sake of his goals, he would need witnesses to spread his influence, letting it be known that his intention was to show the passengers that he is stronger than any hero or monster. Now this may be how he rationalizes his actions, but it definitely seems like his heart and his mind are in two different directions, from which point we would receive a flashback shot to Garo protecting Tadeo as he claimed this to be the moment where the monster wins. And after saying all this, Garo would be kind enough to say that if Saitama understands, then he should leave and consider a career change. Furthermore, stating that he will not be stopping with the destruction of the Monster Association tonight, that he will be dismantling the Hero Association as well. And in doing so, he sought to make the entire world know that his might cannot be challenged. He would leave all remaining heroes with two choices, either surrender or resist and be destroyed. It was that simple. But Saitama would not buy it. He was not all too interested in hearing Garo's ramblings and would express that if the guy was not a monster, then he'd be leaving, which would confuse Garo as he would now wonder if the guy was even listening to a word he even said at all. And with that, Saitama would make it clear that to him, Garo did not even look like a monster, and so it did not seem like he was needed there at all, which would only add to Garo's confusion as he stood there baffled. But what we would receive from there would be a pretty terrifying statement and sentiment from Saitama as he would rant about coming to complain about the noise, which he made clear to Monster King Orochi, only to then have his home completely obliterated as he was now left to find his stuff by fishing around in the water, which was by way of these various battles just ripping this abandoned city apart. Then saying that he kind of feels like destroying the whole planet would be a better option. And when someone like Saitama says something like this, you know to be afraid. And even despite not knowing him to be as powerful as he is, Garo was terrified, and his instincts flared like crazy, alerting him to the danger. Saitama would then admit to his desire to let off a bit of steam by taking down the Monster King people kept talking about. Meanwhile, this man already did so. He already took out Orochi, and just doesn't know it on account of dwarfing all other powers to the point where everything and everyone seems trivial. He would then say that he watched Garo for a while since he seemed pretty cool and looked tough, but upon closer inspection, doubts he's the Monster King at all. And this isn't to say that he considers Garo weak necessarily. I mean, he just complimented him. It's just that once more, he does not see the guy as a monster. And I'd say that as someone able to bypass the intimidation and powerful presences of others, while also mostly maintaining a neutral disposition, Saitama is a pretty good judge of character. He didn't really care if Garo was playing hero or monster or whatever as a hobby, but would warn him not to overdo it before taking his leave. Saitama doesn't inherently consider others to be worthy of extermination just because they're a monster. I mean, look at his situation with Manako. The more accurate statement would be that Garo does not seem like a bad guy to him, and so despite these grandiose and otherwise alarming declarations, he's unfazed. Meanwhile, Garo would just continue to stand there, still stuck on the pressure he had just felt before, now truly wondering who this person before him was. Yet Garo could not shake the feeling that he had seen him before somewhere. But he would refocus himself and decide that it did not matter who this person was. He called out to the guy to get his attention, then questioning if he truly did not understand at all, claiming that underestimating absolute evil was a fatal mistake. Deciding to break the hero's spirit just enough to avoid killing him, very much like he has done to pretty much all the other heroes he has faced, Garo would charge in, expressing that this attack was not personal. However, as a reflex, Saitama would give Garo a little love tap that would send him spiraling back. Saitama would quickly realize what he had done and would apologize to Garo as he came at him kinda fast, which is pretty much the same thing that he said to Flashy Flash previously, yet we know that Garo is definitely faster than Flashy Flash. But what's really crazy is that this hit literally knocked some sense into Garo as he began to remember. This was not his first encounter with Saitama. He would suddenly remember each and every time that he got laid out by Saitama in the past. And as he recalled this mid-spiral, Saitama too would remember something. He'd recall the name of the so-called absolute evil in front of him, Garo. A name he had heard of previously, especially by way of Tank Top Master back when he was in the hospital after facing Garo. The then hero hunter Garo was described to be ridiculously strong and poised to be of interest to Saitama to the point of him desiring to meet the guy. A situation rather similar to the whole Orochi thing where he has already dealt with him on several occasions beyond his recollection. But Garo would now recognize the source of his uneasiness. It was Saitama, the mysterious yet overpowered bald man that had repeatedly beaten the brakes off of him. And what a substantial oversight this was on his part, as he had completely forgotten about the target he now believed to take priority above all else. Garo is now far more than just a hero hunter, yet even still, Saitama is the final and most important target for him to hunt, and he now knows this. With that, these two now have a proper reason to clash. Meanwhile, the many civilians and A-class heroes were receiving medical attention and were just fine. The situation between these two is only just getting started. It's honestly pretty impressive that Garo was able to withstand Saitama's tap, but of course, without the desire to truly harm him, it only makes sense for Garo to remain conscious this time around on account of all these various developments he has had. That being said, Garo was taking Saitama lightly when he attempted to strike him. It's not like it'll make much of a difference either way, but I do believe that it needs to be taken into account regardless, as an intent Garo as opposed to a lax Garo is a big difference in approach. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.